This time on PedalBox, we put fans on our radiator pack.
And of course, to do that, we had to flip the car on its side. Yes, we finally put to use the rotisserie that you may have seen on our Instagram channel from last year. We built this and then had to put it in the shed because we weren't anywhere near ready to do anything with it. But we have now got it on the chassis. It mounts onto the bumper bars front and rear, or where the bumper bars actually go onto the chassis, and it just lifts up. And in order to lift it up to height so that you can actually roll it over, we've used the little jack and built a little plate that we got from that Nissan Pathfinder in Irwindale that we built up for that trailer race last year, which as far as I know still actually hasn't turned a wheel in anger, but we'll see what happens later this year once things start to calm down. Maybe it'll be the car of 2022. Now we've gone underneath this and we've welded in all of these little brackets from the floor, gone around and seamed everything up that's structural. All the new pieces of steel that I put in back here recently, they are all in now, and we've cleaned up a load of welds elsewhere and finished off stuff that would have been really difficult to do if the car hadn't been upside down. So the next thing we're going to add in right now is a skirt that goes all the way along here, made of 1 by 3 mil box, and that's going to do two things. One, it's going to help us with the aero around the floor, and two, it's also going to give a bit of a better jacking point underneath. The floor's only going to be 9 mil thick across the bottom here, so an inch bar coming down from the edge is going to provide a little bit of a skirt. And I guess if we really wanted to, we could actually put a rubber skirt along the edge of it and get some more ground effect. Just whack some big fans in the back and we'll have some of that fan car action pulling us down onto the road. But even without that, that's going to help keep some more of the air underneath the car and stop it spilling out the side. And when it gets to the back into the diffuser, it's going to have a low pressure effect, pulling out and sucking the car down onto the ground.
It's been a long few days working on all of this stuff, tidying up every tiny little seam underneath, welding everything in fully and priming it and painting it and smoothing it all out, but we are now done. The skirts are finished, so that's going to protect the sides of our floor panels when they go in, and we've also thrown a coat of cheap black paint over everything, which we're hoping is going to protect it all a lot better than the primer does, because the primer's a little bit porous, we've noticed. Once it's been on anything on the top half of the car for a while, it starts to deteriorate, and we're hoping that the black paint, being a bit better sealed and a bit more watertight, should keep the underside of the car healthy for a lot longer than the primer does, which is good because we don't really get underneath it very often, and that sort of showed in a few places as we're putting this all on. There's quite a lot of rust on some parts of it, so it's definitely needed a bit of cleanup. But hopefully we don't have to go under here again for a long time.
So in the engine bay, we've done a couple of bits, but the main one is we've added on a little plate to the bottom of our rear gearbox mount, and that just allows us to lift the car up, and it stops us bending the very bottom of it because it was getting a bit fragile. The main thing that we need to do is with this stanchion to allow the 6-speed gearbox to clear. So if we just lift this back over and pop a bolt in there to hold it, you can see where this stanchion comes down, and we've already taken a notch out here. And unfortunately, the gearbox still doesn't quite fit. It's just going to knock into it. It's going to be a nightmare. It might crack the housing. And we've also got the engine set all the way across to the right-hand side of the car in order to make that fit, which isn't ideal either. So we're going to cut this down from the very top edge here and just take it all the way off to be 1 inch wide at the bottom. Another job we need to do is fit the fans onto the radiator, because we haven't actually thought about that really at all, but we need to start looking at a bracket that's going to fit around this. Now, Chris is just going to help me locate this in here, and we put the radiator back on after we stripped everything back off. So these are the two fans that we're going to use. They are just TT A3 fans, but they come in two sizes. There's a big one and a small one. Now the big one is way too big, so we've got a second small one that we can put in on the back of this fan, and they do fit reasonably well. Now the one on Chris's side is dead easy. There's loads of space, nothing is really in the way, and we can position it vertically, left, right, really quite simply, and we only need to avoid this top corner here, which has the fill tube and the temperature sensor on. This side is a mess. So after a lot of trial and error and test fitting, I think I've managed to make a bracket that fits on the front of the radiator and should require only very minor adjustments to the chassis itself. Now, it's a two-part build to go on here. We were doing some of this on the live stream. If you've watched a couple of those, you can see us try to CAD under pressure and generally talk a bit of nonsense. So do check out the live streams. We're going to try and keep doing those and doing more of this stuff during the weeks. So the first part to go in is this upper brace, and this goes between the top and bottom sections. And then the main fan shroud is this funky looking pair of spectacles here, which tucks down over the top with a little bracket which sits through with two captive nuts on the back of there, and then that fits into the top. Now this does allow us to angle it a little bit, but actually we're probably going to need all of the forward leaning that we can possibly get. So we're going to bolt this up with the fans, pop it on the car and see if there's anything else we need to do to adjust this before we make it look not like an ugly pair of spectacles. So that's our radiator pack, and these lines can all be attached across here and then run into the loom, which would be really nice. There's enough, I say there's enough room. There is just barely enough room around this lower hose here to get the silicone pipe on, but it should be okay. So we're going to offer this up into the car and see what adjustments we have to make to either this bracket or to the car itself. So here's the radiator pack. We've trimmed that bolt down, so it should now drop in relatively nicely. And as before, this just kind of sits down underneath here while it clatters around, drops into our two little pinholes on the bottom, and should come and rest up yet. So currently the only clearance problem we have is the counterpart one of these little stays on this side that's touching. Now we don't actually need this upper mount because we have the one in the middle, so we can lose this. So I'm going to pull this out, chop these two upper mounts off, and then see how close we can get this fan to the underside of here. So obviously we have a clearance issue with this crossbar, and that's fine, but we need to move the fans down or across or somewhere out the way, or take a notch out of this bar. Now before we start cutting into things, we need to look at where else we could move around to, and that raises the question of the lower hose, which we haven't actually fitted on yet, to see what happens. And the upper hose on this side also has the same problem. So the first thing I'm going to do is try threading this through and see how screwed we actually are.
Bad news, it doesn't work very well that way around, so we're taking the whole system apart again for I think now our fourth attempt at designing all of the coolant lines up here. So we've got these pieces left over from the old kit, which I'm just going to put up out of frame up there, and we've got these pieces of shiny new stuff that we've ordered from eBay. Now this avoids a lot of the old problems. It relocates our inlet hose. Rather than coming up and snaking through the front of the car here, we're going to come up behind the steering rack on this side and just go over the whole assembly, and that gives us clearance around our electrical connector there, which previously we didn't have. And we've changed the coupler that we're using on the bottom of the radiator to one that hopefully doesn't pinch down too hard around this upright. So it looks like it's still pinching a little bit, but we're pretty sure there's still enough internal, like cross-sectional area there for it to flow just as much as we need. We've test fit everything up here and we're looking pretty good. We've solved most of our major problems and made one very minor solvable new one. Our return line on the bottom of the radiator here is a lot less constricted than it was before. It's got a much nicer, cleaner flow path out, so hopefully that will make sure the water flows really good on that side. And we've added all of this that goes over the top here, and that gets us miles away from our temperature sensor point on the top left of the RAS. We've got loads of room there for the electrical connector. It does mean we've got a nice big airlock up here, but that's really easily solved. We can just put a little bleed line in, and that sorts that right out.
Maybe we didn't need to flip the car over just to do the radiator pack, but there was a bunch of other stuff we needed to do.
Yeah, there's a whole lot of crimes in our fabrication from the whole last 3 years or so on this build that we've really had to clean up. So we've had the car up on its side, both ways over, filling in loads of little holes, filling in loads of areas that we couldn't get to before without the rotisserie. This has been an absolute godsend for us. It's a Really good thing we built this back in summer.
Yeah, and worse than that, we've actually found bits that I didn't even think we'd missed. I was convinced that we'd done, and just finding so many more problems, more little pinholes in bits that I was convinced were absolutely done and dusted and ready to clean up, and they really, really weren't.
Yeah, so we've got loads more cleanup to do, but we're going to spare you from having to watch that, because honestly, it's all a bit miserable and boring to watch.
Yeah.
So we're going to crack on, spend the rest of the weekend tidying this up.
Yeah, and if you haven't already, do subscribe to the channel. Go back and have a look at all of our other videos. Let us know what you think in the comments. And check out shop.pedalbox.show, where you can buy hats like this, but not like I'm wearing here, and t-shirts, hoodies, and we've got mugs and stickers and all sorts of other things on there, and more stuff coming soon.
And as always, you can support us on patreon.com/pedalbox show from as little as $1 a month. Any money that you send us there goes straight into this, or actually at the minute, some of it's going into the golf, but that's a whole separate story. So yeah, you can help us out with fixing this up. You get access to our Discord server where you can chat with us, show us your projects, and keep a bit more up to date on what's going on with these, because we actually usually talk on there in real time a little bit about what we're up to, which is great for keeping up.
Yeah, you'll get a bit more of a heads up on how things are going, which is often badly. And considering I've been saying for about 3 months now that I'm going to put all of this car and the Thunderbird back together to work on the Golf, and still haven't, you can see how well that's going. But that's for another episode. Thanks very much for watching. We'll see you again.